In December of 2009, a wolf designated 755 left his pack in Yellowstone's Lamar Valley. He walked alone through 40 miles of frozen wilderness. Biologists expected him to die within weeks. Instead, he did something that changed how scientists understand the lone wolf. He found a mate. He established new territory. He founded what would become one of the most successful packs in Yellowstone's recorded history. The lone wolf was not fleeing failure. He was engineering possibility. In 1921, Carl Jung gave us a word: introversion. He meant something precise by it. It's not shyness, not social anxiety, not misanthropy, but a fundamental orientation of psychic energy. While the extrovert draws vitality from the external world, the introvert generates power from within. But Jung could not see what we can see now. Neuroimaging studies have revealed measurable differences in the brain. In introverts, blood flows more heavily to the frontal lobes, the regions governing planning, memory, and complex problem solving. In extroverts, greater blood flow appears in areas responsible for sensory processing. Consider dopamine, the neurotransmitter of anticipation and reward. Research by Colin DeJong at the University of Minnesota has demonstrated that introverts possess heightened dopamine sensitivity. Where the extrovert requires floods of stimulation to reach optimal arousal, the introvert reaches that threshold far sooner. Psychologist Hans Osunk described this as baseline arousal theory. The introvert brain runs hotter at rest. It requires no external flame to stay alive. The extrovert brain runs cooler, seeking stimulation the way a cold-blooded creature seeks sun. Neither is deficient. They are simply calibrated for different environments. This is what that means in practice. The lone wolf does not choose solitude because something is broken. The lone wolf chooses solitude because their nervous system is telling them the truth. This is where you think clearly. This is where you regenerate. This is where your particular form of power comes online. 70,000 years ago, our ancestors faced a crisis that nearly ended humanity. Genetic evidence suggests the human population collapsed to perhaps 10,000 individuals. We were a species on the edge of extinction, and yet we survived. Evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson explains this survival through what he calls frequency-dependent selection. Natural selection does not optimize for a single personality type. It preserves variation, because variation is how populations survive uncertainty. A tribe of 40 humans, all identically social, identically risk-averse, identically dependent on one another, is fragile. When conditions shift, they shift for everyone at once. But introduce into that population individuals who are less dependent on social reward, more tolerant of isolation, more inclined toward independent exploration. Geneticists have identified the DRD47R allele, sometimes called the wanderer gene. It appears in roughly 20% of human populations and correlates with novelty seeking, risk tolerance, and reduced need for social reinforcement. 20% is a ratio evolution has maintained across thousands of generations. Those who carried this variation were the ones who left when staying meant stagnation. They were the first to cross the Bering Strait, the first to navigate the Pacific, the first to wonder what lay beyond the horizon their tribe called the end of the world. Then, in 1989, developmental psychologist Jerome Kagan began a longitudinal study that would last decades. He exposed infants to novel sounds, faces, and objects, and measured their reactions. Some remained calm. Others reacted intensely, showing signs of heightened physiological arousal. Conventional wisdom might assume these reactive infants would grow into anxious or troubled adults. Instead, Kagan discovered something more subtle. They grew into thoughtful, observant, often introverted adults. Their nervous systems were not malfunctioning. They were processing more deeply, taking in more information, running more internal simulations, preparing for more contingencies. Kagan called this a vigilant temperament. Psychologists Elaine Aron later described this as the sensitive person trait and connected it to what she calls the sentinel hypothesis. Across species, from insects to primates, roughly 15 to 20% of individuals display heightened sensitivity and reduced impulsivity in ancestral environments. These were the watchers. While the majority socialized and fed, the sentinels stood at the periphery, detecting predators, sensing weather shifts, noticing subtle changes that distracted many missed. The tribe needed extroverts to maintain cohesion, but it needed sentinels to maintain survival. Isaac Newton produced his most revolutionary work during the plague years, alone at his family farm. Calculus, optics, the laws of motion born in isolation. Charles Darwin spent decades in near reclusion, happiest when left alone with his specimens and thoughts. The sentinel mind requires silence the way a laboratory requires sterility, not as deprivation, but as the necessary condition for its work. And yet we have built a civilization that treats solitude as pathology. Susan Cain documented what she calls the extrovert ideal, the belief that the healthy, successful human must be gregarious, collaborative, and energized by constant interaction. This belief has no scientific basis. It is cultural mythology masquerading as psychological truth. The lone wolf must function inside systems designed for a different nervous system. Open offices that fracture concentration. Meetings that drain energy without purpose. Social expectations that frame solitude as antisocial or broken. Over time, they internalize this judgment. They begin to wonder if their contentment in solitude is a failure, if they are somehow less alive than those who cannot bear to be alone. This is the lie that must be refused. The introvert is not an extrovert who failed to develop. They are a different instrument, playing music the orchestra cannot hear because the orchestra is too loud to notice. I require a solitude, Nietzsche wrote, which is to say, recovery, return to myself. He understood what science now confirms. Solitude for the lone wolf is not the absence of life. It is the presence of the self, undiluted. Blaise Pascal suggested that humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Perhaps those who can do so have access to something the restless majority cannot reach. Extroverts possess genuine strengths drawing energy from groups, thinking aloud, finding identity in social mirrors. But the reverse is also true. The lone wolf carries depths that cannot be found in company, insights that only silence reveals. And yet, solitude is not the rejection of connection. It is the precondition for real connection. Research shows the difference between being alone and being lonely. One can be lonely in a crowd and deeply connected in silence. The lone wolf does not avoid relationships. They avoid relationships that require them to be someone else. Their bonds are fewer, but deeper. Wolf 755 did not join a random pack. He waited, he searched, he found the precise mate and territory where his nature could thrive. The lone wolf does not refuse belonging. They refuse belonging at random. So, what is the lone wolf for? Every civilization, at every turning point, has required those who could see beyond consensus. Those who could tolerate the discomfort of their own mind long enough to return with something new. They walk ahead into territories the tribe has not yet imagined. Not all return, but those who do bring back maps, warnings, possibilities because the territory ahead is vast.